crafty friends, it's Jess from JessCrafts.com, and today I'm here with a card featuring Lawn Fawn for the Tupelo Designs LLC Tuesdays with Tupelo feature. Last week on Tuesdays with Tupelo, I used a paper stencil with the Wplus9 Starry Backdrops die, and the paper stencil, when I put the glitter paste on it, created a now glittered stencil, and I thought rather than throwing that out, I could actually use that glitter stencil as a card element on my next card. So I started thinking about the different sets that I had gotten recently from Tupelo Designs, and there was this Toboggan Together stamp set from Lawn Fawn, which worked perfectly with this glittery white and the starry backdrop theme. So I thought it would be a great winter or Christmas card, and so I'm pairing it up with this Christmas set. I have a stitched circle die from My Favorite Things and a scallop circle as well, and I'm going to be doing a little bit of inlay, so I line them up and I cut them together so that way the scallop will fit exactly around the circle and it will lay flat as one piece, but it will make it easier to color them separately and still give a little definition. I'm going to be doing some masking off with my image because I want to create a scene where the little penguin from Toboggan Together by Lawn Fawn will be surrounded by presents. Tupelo Designs LLC is getting in a lot of Christmas stuff, and in anticipation of all those Christmas things, they're also having all of their Halloween stuff on sale. So if you want to pick something up for next year, this is definitely the time because it's already going to be 40% off as of Wednesday, I believe. So be sure to check that out and see their new Christmas goodies while getting a deal on Halloween. I am stamping the penguin on some Ink-a-Dink-a-Doo stamping mask paper and onto my 110-pound cardstock here because I'll be doing some Copic coloring. When working with masks, you do want to make sure that your ink underneath your mask is dry because the mask will sometimes pull up that ink a little bit. Once I have the penguin masked off and I want him to be foremost in the card, I want him to be sitting in front of the present, so you have to stamp him first and mask him. And I will cover him and then I will stamp the two presents, groups of presents on either side of him. I found the first time I did it that I didn't like that my penguin was so high, so I did stamp it again and make sure that my penguin was sitting out in front of the presents and below them, so he really does look more like he's in front of them. I'm going to show you a little bit of the coloring. People have asked for me to share coloring a little bit more regularly, and rather than speed it up with some music, I'll just talk briefly about it. And you may hear the same things over and over again as I talk about my coloring, but I think that that can be helpful to people who are really learning how to color. What I'm starting with is an overall base. Sometimes I leave white areas when I start with my lightest color, but this image is so small that I find it difficult to even leave those white areas because if I add too much ink, I'm more likely to get bleeding in a small image like this. And so I don't fuss with it as much because, again, the more ink you lay on, the more likely it is to bleed out. I'm just using 3 colors for a blend, and starting with my lightest, then I decided to go in with my darkest, and finally ending with my middle tone to blend it out. Rather than going in several times, where like some people go in from, they do their lightest, their medium, their darkest, back to their medium, back to their lightest. Again, that's just too much ink on a small image in my experience, so I like to keep it light. And also with the shading on the feet and the beak, I actually just use a single color. And by layering more layers on one area versus the other, you will get a slightly darker without having to blend 2 markers, and it's perfect for small areas. Then I want to cast a little bit of shadow because I think that he will be sitting on some snow, but I don't want to leave it perfectly white. And so I'm just using W00 and W1. I like these 2 markers for this sort of creating a shadow in a white area, but also for creating shadows in your coloring when you don't have a darker marker. A little bit of W1 can be used to add shading to any color collection. I'm going to color the sky. Normally I wouldn't do this with Copics because it could take a lot of ink and a lot of time, but it's a relatively small sky area, and I thought that it might look a little bit better than Distress Inks to keep it consistent. Although, of course, you could just fill in a little bit of Distress Ink color. I'm using B24 and 28. These colors are pretty far apart, They came as part of a collection pack though with some sea and sky, and so they were meant to be used together. However, if you just use them right next to each other, you may notice that they don't blend so easily. My biggest tip for this is to touch the marker tips. Touch the lighter marker to the darker marker, and then start blending it out. Also, in the area that you want to blend, you want to make sure that area is wet. So you might see that I'm working in pretty small areas at a time. So I'm working in just about an inch of the sky at a time, because if I try to add color to too many areas, before I have time to blend it out, it will be dry. So you don't have to work really, really fast with Copics, but do keep that in mind, that as it absorbs into the paper, it's going to blend just a little bit less. And so if you're having a hard time blending, think about blending in smaller chunks, and your ink might move around a little bit more on the paper in those instances. And then I'm just going to pull everything out with the B24. I also like to add a little bit of color to the edges, because sometimes you can still see the white edges on the finished card. In this case, it's not going to be such a big deal because I am going to add that scallop circle around it. And I will just color that red with some Copic markers. I'll use the same red that I used for the packages. And in this case, it's going to be more important to go along the edges so that you can not see any of those white edges, as those will be particularly visible in this scallop, as sometimes the scallop creates little pockets where the color doesn't go. So just run it along like you would with any fussy cut image. Once I had that in place, I was ready to do my sentiment stamping. I wanted to really make this glitter background pop, and so I'm not going to add any more patterns to the paper. Instead, I'm going to use a little bit of vellum and some black cardstock. So I'm going to stamp my sentiment on black cardstock as well. I'm going to white emboss, and sometimes I avoid white heat embossing because it's kind of intimidating. It's hard to find a good white powder and not get any stray bits. I have found that Hero Arts white is one of the best. I have tried a few Ranger whites, have not found one that I really, really like, but I can recommend the Hero Arts white embossing powder. And make sure you use an embossing buddy or some sort of anti-static, like some cornstarch before, because you're less likely to get little stray bits, which are much more noticeable when using white on black than in some other situations. And make sure that your heat gun is hot before you bring it to the paper so that you have less likelihood of it warping. I decided to just make things a little bit out of the ordinary and tilt some of those background papers, and then I'm going to use my Teflon bone folder to get a really nice crease on this thick card base. I've been really loving using a thick card base. When I attached the vellum piece, I just made sure that the only adhesive I used would be covered up by the white panel that I placed on top of it. And when I adhere this down, that will be it for my card today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafting tutorials, including Christmas card tutorials, be sure to stay tuned to my channel, subscribe for more, but I also will leave you links to some other Christmas card tutorials in the video description below. For any of these supplies, you can check out Tupelo Designs LLC, and I'm going to leave you some of my social media information in the video description below too, in case you want to follow over on Pinterest or Instagram. Thanks for watching. Bye.